It was an unusually sunny day, as if the city itself had no idea that something terrible was about to unfold. On the morning of March 29, 1975, a teenage girl left her home in a quiet suburb of Montreal. She was 16 years old, full of life, wearing a light jacket and completely free of fear. Her name was Sharron Prior. It was supposed to be an ordinary day, nothing out of the ordinary. She was planning to meet her friends at a nearby pizzeria, a place where she had always felt safe, but Sharron never arrived. That would be the last day the world ever saw that innocent girl. What followed became a nightmare that would haunt her family and an entire city for more than 4 decades. Her mother, Gloria, waited at first, hoping she was just running a little late. Then came worry, then came fear. Hours turned into days, days into years. But one question remained. What happened to Sharron, and who dared to hurt her? In this video, we'll take you on a journey through one of the most haunting and mysterious cases in Canadian history. From the broad daylight disappearance of a teenager to the discovery of her body in an abandoned field, through decades of frustration and failed attempts to find her killer, until one shocking moment when DNA spoke from a grave that hadn't been touched in over 40 years. This isn't just a true crime story. It's the story of a girl who could have been your sister, your daughter, or even you. Stay with us. Sharron Prior was never just another name in a crime archive, nor a faded face on a missing persons poster. She was a 16-year-old girl living a quiet, simple life in the Pointe-Saint-Charles neighborhood of Montreal, Canada. Born on February 29, 1959, a rare date, as if fate had already chosen her story to be different, in a heartbreakingly tragic way. Sharron was raised in a modest and close-knit family. Her mother, Gloria Prior, was the cornerstone of the home, a strong woman who carried the responsibility of raising her children after separating from her husband. Sharron was the middle child, and she shared a uniquely close bond with her mother, one filled with deep love, respect, and tenderness. Sharron's personality was a beautiful blend of kindness, shyness, and innocence. She was a quiet soul, well loved by everyone around, her capturing hearts with her gentle smile and sparkling eyes. She wasn't talkative, but her looks and soft presence said more than words ever could. She loved reading, especially books about children and education, because she dreamed of becoming a teacher someday. A teacher who could make children feel safe, just as her mother made her feel secure and loved. At school, she was a diligent student who enjoyed literature and excelled in her academic subjects. Her friends described her as light-hearted, someone you could trust easily and feel close to. She loved spending time at the local pizza place near her home, where she and her girlfriends would gather after school to laugh and share stories. She wasn't the adventurous or rebellious type. Quite the opposite. Sharron was a homebody who cherished staying close to her family, especially her mother. Despite the modest neighborhood she lived in and the financial struggles her family faced, Sharron never lost her sense of hope. She dreamed of a warm, stable future, one built on giving and compassion. She was planning her life, thinking about college, and maybe even working with children who had special needs. But life, unfortunately, didn't give her enough time. During her teenage years, Sharron was involved in a light-hearted relationship with a boy named John, a normal, youthful connection marked by innocent affection. They often met with mutual friends and shared small moments that brought her comfort and emotional support during a critical stage of adolescence. On the night of her disappearance, Sharron had planned to meet John and her friends at Marina's pizzeria on Wellington Street, right in the Pointe-Saint-Charles neighborhood. They were supposed to meet around 7 p.m., but Sharron never arrived. On the morning of March 29th, 1975, Sharron Prior woke up at her family home in Pointe Saint-Charles. Like any other ordinary day, it was early spring, cold and damp, with overcast skies and a light drizzle falling throughout the day. She woke up early and spent her morning doing her usual chores, tidying up her room and helping her mother with small household tasks. Though she was a diligent student, Sharron didn't go to school that day. It was the start of a long weekend. She took advantage of the break to relax and read a few of her favorite books. Those who knew her at the time described her as calm and disciplined, a quiet girl who kept to herself and stayed out of trouble. That afternoon, she had lunch with her family and spoke with her mother about her plans for the evening. Sharron had told her she intended to meet her friends later that day, and throughout the morning and afternoon, there was nothing unusual, no signs of worry or hesitation. She spoke to her mother naturally, showing no desire to cancel or change her plans. As the rainy evening approached, Sharron began getting ready to go out and spend time with her friends. She dressed warmly in clothes suited for the cold, wet weather. She chose a heavy coat and waterproof shoes, small but thoughtful choices that reflected her careful nature and attention to detail. Before leaving, Sharron spoke with her mother in her usual warm and relaxed manner. They exchanged a light-hearted goodbye. Her mother reminded her not to stay out too late, especially given the bad weather. Sharron smiled reassuringly and promised she would be careful and wouldn't be late. She also spoke on the phone with her boyfriend John, who was supposed to meet her at Marina's Pizzeria, the familiar hangout spot for their group of friends. There was no sign of tension or distress in her voice during the call. On the contrary, she sounded excited for a regular evening out with her friends. Around 6:30 p.m., Sharron left her family home and headed toward the pizzeria. The walk only took a few minutes. She carried a small purse containing a bit of money and her personal essentials, just as she always did. There was nothing unusual in the neighborhood that evening. The occasional car passed by. The dim lights of shop windows reflected off the wet pavement, and the overall atmosphere was typical for a cold, quiet Saturday night. But Sharron never made it to her destination. At Marina's Pizzeria, her friends began to arrive, some early, others a bit late, but all of them assumed Sharron would be among the first, as she usually was. Minutes passed, then a full hour, but she still hadn't shown up. At first, no one panicked. Maybe she got delayed, stopped along the way, or decided at the last minute to stay home. But as 7:30 p.m. approached, unease began to creep in. One of her friends called her house, only to be told by her mother that Sharron had left nearly an hour earlier, headed exactly where they were waiting. By then, the sky had grown darker, and the rain had picked up. No one knew exactly where Sharron was between the moment she left her home and the moment she failed to arrive. No one saw her go into any nearby stores. No one saw her crossing the main street. It was as if the earth had swallowed her whole. As anxiety mounted, one of her friends went back to her house to tell her mother that Sharron had never arrived. At first, her mother assumed she might simply be late or had changed plans, but deep inside, something felt wrong. Sharron was known for being punctual and responsible. She wouldn't have just disappeared without calling. And so began the waiting, the dread, and the desperate search. Moments that would mark the beginning of a mystery that would remain unanswered for decades. More than 2 hours had passed since Sharron Prior left her home on the evening of Saturday, March 29th, 1975, without arriving at her destination or returning home. Worry had started to creep into the Prior household, especially for her mother, Gloria Prior. Sharron was known for being responsible, disciplined, and dependable. It was completely unlike her to miss an appointment or fail to contact someone if plans had changed. Around 9:30 p.m., After her friends confirmed she had never shown up at Marina's pizzeria, Gloria felt something wasn't right. She picked up the phone and called the police to report her daughter missing. According to police records, Gloria's voice during that call was filled with fear and urgency. She explained that Sharron had left earlier that evening for a familiar destination, but never arrived, and no one had heard from her since. At the time, law enforcement responded with cautious restraint. Like many similar cases in that era, teenage disappearances were often initially classified as temporary runaways. But this time, things were different. Within just 12 hours, even investigators began to grow uneasy. No one had seen Sharron, and no trace of her movements could be found after she left her house. By the morning of Sunday, March 30th, police officially declared that she was missing under suspicious circumstances. A large-scale search was launched in her neighborhood and surrounding areas. As the sun rose over Pointe Saint-Charles, the Prior household was filled with a growing sense of dread. Sharron hadn't come home that night. She hadn't called. This had never happened before. Her mother, Gloria, stayed up all night, sleepless, crying, staring out the window in the hope her daughter might appear on the sidewalk. But the streets remained silent. The front door stayed closed. By early morning, the police began treating the case with increasing seriousness. It was now clear Sharron had never made it to the pizzeria, and none of her friends had seen her that night. Search teams began combing through the neighborhood, starting with the quiet residential streets of Pointe Saint-Charles in the southwest of Montreal. Officers went door to door, asking neighbors if they had seen Sharron walking that evening. At the same time, family members and local volunteers joined the search, checking alleys, parks, and narrow passageways. The cold weather and heavy rain from the night before made things even more difficult. Flyers were posted across the neighborhood, on lampposts and in shop windows. Each one bore the same heartbreaking image. A smiling 16-year-old girl with long brown hair, warm brown eyes, and a friendly face. She was last seen wearing a light green jacket and dark pants. What made her disappearance all the more unsettling was the short distance between her house and the restaurant, just a 10-minute walk, and yet, not a single sign of her presence. No witnesses, no clues. It was as if she had simply vanished. As the hours passed, the theory of a possible abduction gained traction. A girl like Sharron, walking a familiar path in a familiar neighborhood, didn't just disappear on her own. A silent crime was becoming harder to deny. In the days that followed, Montreal police ramped up their investigation. Dozens of Pointe Saint-Charles residents were interviewed. Every possible route Sharron might have taken was retraced. Detectives searched for anyone who may have seen her or seen anything suspicious on that rainy Saturday night. Witness statements poured in, some conflicting. One man claimed to have seen a girl resembling Sharron being forced into a car on a side street. Others reported hearing strange screaming in the area, but there was no physical evidence to build a solid case. Then, on the fourth day, the unimaginable happened. On April 2nd, 1975, Sharron Prior's body was discovered inside an abandoned garage in the town of Longueuil, across the St. Lawrence River from Montreal. The location was over 8 kilometers from her home. Her body showed clear signs of extreme violence. There were unmistakable indications of sexual assault and strangulation. She had been brutally attacked. Left, alone in the dark, in a forgotten place, no one should ever end up. But even after this horrific discovery, the investigators had no specific suspects. There were no surveillance cameras on the streets back then, nor were there any witnesses who clearly saw the kidnapping. All they had was a DNA sample found at the crime scene, carefully preserved, but it did not match any record in the police database at the time, as DNA analysis techniques were not yet advanced. Years passed, and progress in the investigation was slow. Several suspects were called in for questioning over the years, but none matched the DNA. By the late 1980s, as time went on, the case began to lose its media momentum. Although the Prior family never stopped pressing for justice, the investigations gradually began to stall. By the 1990s, the case of Sharron Prior had officially become one of the most mysterious murder cases in Montreal, and it became known as one of Canada's most notable cold cases. Cases that remain unsolved despite many years, but stay open in hope of advancements in investigative technology. Although the file remained locked away in mystery for decades, the biological sample found on her body was never forgotten. It was carefully stored in evidence drawers with the hope that one day it would give her a voice and justice. For nearly half a century, the case of Sharron Prior remained a tightly closed mystery, an open wound in the heart of her family, and one of the most infamous crimes in Montreal's history. But in 2023, after 48 years of silence, something no one expected happened. The mystery began to crack, and the justice that once seemed impossible slowly started moving toward the truth. It all began when the Longueuil police officially decided to reopen the case, taking advantage of the significant advances in forensic DNA technology. The sample preserved since 1975, which could not be accurately analyzed at the time, was subjected to a new examination using a technique known as familial DNA analysis. This modern technique does not only look for a direct match, but can identify potential relatives of the perpetrator, even if the perpetrator himself is not in the database. The surprise came when a partial match appeared with a person who had undergone DNA testing for reasons unrelated to the crime, a person who was a relative of a man named Franklin Romeo Seckler. Franklin lived in the area at the time of the crime and had a criminal record that included violent offenses. He had already been imprisoned in separate cases. The painful irony was that police did not seriously interrogate him in the 1970s, despite him being in the vicinity of the crime. Franklin died in 2011 at the age of 65 and was buried in West Virginia, USA. Here began one of the strangest and most powerful moments in the investigation. After obtaining permission from American authorities and his family, his remains were exhumed and a DNA sample was extracted. The results were shocking, yet conclusive. The DNA found on Sharron's body in 1975 matched Franklin Romeo Seckler 100%. Finally, after nearly 5 decades, the Prior family learned the name of their daughter's killer. Franklin Romeo Seckler was not just a name that emerged from a DNA test. He was a man with a dark history of violence and aggressive behavior. Born in Pennsylvania, USA, he moved to Canada during his youth, living for a time in the Montreal area. In 1975, at the time of Sharron Prior's murder, Franklin was 26 years old, in the prime of his physical strength and power, but also at the peak of his criminal behavior. Although the police did not connect him to the crime back then, his criminal record was far from clean. He had multiple violent offenses, most notably an attempted kidnapping and sexual assault of a young girl in the same year Sharron was killed. However, that case never went to trial due to lack of evidence, and DNA technology did not exist at the time to directly link him to any crime. Notably, this attempted assault happened just a few kilometers from the location where Sharron's body was found. Later, after solving Sharron's case, police revisited this incident and linked the behavior as consistent with what happened to the young girl in March 1975. In his later years, Franklin returned to the United States and settled in West Virginia. According to public records, he worked simple jobs, never married, and lived a mostly reclusive life. Neighbors described him as an eccentric man, rarely speaking, always keeping his windows shut. Seckler died quietly in 2011, never questioned about the crime he committed. He was buried without trial and without any sense of justice for Sharron's family, who had spent decades wondering who did this and why. Perhaps most shocking is that Franklin was likely a lone killer, driven not by personal motives or revenge, but simply by opportunity and a desire for control and violence. He was the kind of criminal who leaves no trace but in the fleeting eyes that saw him, or in a DNA fingerprint quietly preserved for decades, waiting for the day of reckoning. After confirming his identity in 2023, the Longueuil police considered Franklin Romeo Seckler the sole person responsible for Sharron's murder. It is not believed that he had any accomplices. The case was officially closed, though its scar remains etched in the memory of the city and the Prior family. Years have passed, but Gloria's heart, Sharron's mother, remains stuck on that night. The night her daughter left and never returned. Every day was a weight. Every year was an unforgettable pain. Today, she knows the truth, and for the first time, she can whisper her daughter's name without her voice trembling. But how many other Sharrons have stories yet untold? How many families still wait, silently, for the truth to be revealed? We tell these stories so they are not forgotten, so they don't fade into dusty files or get buried beneath the weight of oblivion. If you believe the truth deserves to be told, and that every departed soul deserves their story to be heard, subscribe to our channel. Let's revive those silent voices together, one by one.